Alexander was a man who was born at the end of the 19th century in Tasmania actually, and moved to Sydney to become an actor. That was his life ambition, that's what he really wanted to do. And unfortunately, over a short period of time, he suffered with very, very serious throat problems and his voice sounded terrible on stage. So he took rest and saw doctors and took the medicine and did everything that he was asked to do. But as soon as he went on stage again, he suffered with the same condition. So he said to the doctors, it's something I'm doing with myself that's causing the problem. And unfortunately, the doctors couldn't tell him what it was. So he was a very tenacious individual, I think, and he got a bank of mirrors and over a period of many months began observing quite closely what he was doing with himself when he went to speak. And he found that he was pulling his head back and down on the spine. So he said to himself, I'm going to forcibly push my head forward and up, and that created just as many problems because the body was in a state of tension. So he said to himself, that's my aim, to send my head away from the top of the spine. How do I maintain that aim while very quietly sending the head away from the top of the spine? And he managed to do that by what he called sending directions. So he kept that aim going while he went to speak, and he solved his throat condition. Not only that, his whole health improved. People thought that was great. So his fellow actors said, look, you really need to share this work. And at that time, George Bernard Shaw in London heard about him and invited him to London. And he was a bit of a gambler, Alexander, and managed to get the money together by betting on a horse, and came to England on the strength of the winnings of that particular race, and ended up on the London stage initially as a voice coach for actors. And then slowly over time, people got wind of him being in London, and he helped many people with many different things. It just started with the voice, but he improved many different breathing difficulties, and eventually was asked to start teaching teachers, and that's where we are today. The Society of Teachers began in the 1940s, and there are now about 4,000 of us worldwide. Well, the Alexander technique is a way of looking after ourselves in all life's activities, really. So we learn how to look after our backs in the main, and Alexander found out that the back of the neck was a very important point. If we're pulling our heads back and down on the spine, then we go down with that. If I show you a little bit what that looks like, yes, I can sort of go like that. Yes. And that pulling down, we call it in the Alexander world, actually not only is a physical thing, but it's a psychological thing as well. So if I can orient my head in a forward and upwards direction, then I will be more uplifted in my body, and I will have a different outlook on how things are in my life.
So posture is really important.
Posture's really important. However, with the Alexander technique, we're not just looking at posture, we're looking at our everyday habits. So we can decide which of the habits that we have. So first of all, we need to be observant. We need to be really clear about which habits we have, and often our habits are unconscious. We're not clear about which ones we have and which ones we don't have. So in the beginning, we are acting as observers. And then we decide which ones are going to be good for us long term, and we can keep those. And we learn new ways of being, new habits, new ways of picking things up and sitting and standing and walking and talking. And so that we can look after ourselves more as we grow older.
So if we're relearning good habits and letting go of the not so helpful habits that we've formed, how easy is it to do that? Because I guess that's where you come in, because you kind of know what to tell us to do.
Well, it's very difficult, that's right. So my job as a teacher is to listen to very carefully when you're having an Alexander lesson. I listen very, very carefully to your body, and I can sense where you're holding on.
How do you listen? Can you just...
I listen with my hands.
I see.
And then I listen to the way you talk. I watch the way people move and the way they sit in the main, because we're using chairs all the time. We're in and out of chairs all the time. And it's not really the chair that's at fault, it's the way we sit in it that we can often slump. And that slumping then has a psychological bearing on ourselves. You know, we're all one piece. We're made up of our mental self, our physical self, our emotional self and spiritual self. So we're all one self. So if we pay attention to the way we're using the body, that's going to have an effect on the rest of ourselves. And my job is to point out where I feel hidden tensions and holding on patterns, and then the pupil then can learn to say, I've noticed that myself now, and I can decide to let that go.
I see. So how long does it take to actually learn this, to be able to do it yourself?
Well, it depends on the individual, and it very much depends on how willing the individual is prepared to practice. So we call it the Alexander work and not an Alexander therapy. It might feel very nice when you come for an Alexander lesson and you feel a little bit more open and lighter in yourself, but actually it's up to you when you leave the time with your teacher to go out, and that's really when your lesson starts. So your lesson really is in life. So it's being more mindful about the way you're using yourself in everyday activities.
So you're able to use what you've learnt in the session,
yes,
to remember and use that, say, when you're sitting down or getting in and out of the car or whatever.
Exactly, or picking heavy objects, or you're doing anything really that you would do normally, making a cup of tea even. And one of the ways of practicing this lengthening of the spine is by doing a semisupine practice. And we work on that at the beginning of a lesson, and then you would go home and practice that for 5 or 10 minutes, and I even have a little audio file that people can listen to if they want to, and you become more rested. We call it position of constructive rest, which is fantastic. It gives you a little moment in your day where you can come back to yourself, let everything else go, focus on how your back is meeting with the floor, and lengthening and widening so that when you come up from your position of constructive rest, you feel more energized. This is what we call the semisupine position. It's lying with the legs raised, the knees are up to the ceiling, the feet are well down. And then, as you see, the head is lying on a book. So we look to see where the cervical spine is in relationship to the floor, and we want to see a parallel line there. And as you can see, there's a lovely line of the neck there. And then once you're in this position, we think about how to release the back into the floor. You might notice that perhaps your left side is slightly higher than your right side. And we don't go to making any changes, but we come back to what Alexander calls directions, which is allowing the neck to be free, in order for the head to aim gently away from the top of the spine to allow the whole of the back to lengthen and widen.
So when you're lying in this position on the floor or on a couch, you're actually thinking of those directions, are you?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And so we're not just there thinking about what we might have for supper or what I've got to do when I get up. It's really being in the moment and really, really focusing on how your body meets the force of gravity. And then slowly, slowly, gravity will unwind you a wee bit, and you'll begin to notice that your spine and the whole of your back is slightly wider and slightly longer on the floor. And then that's the time you might do that for 5 minutes. It might take you 10 minutes to get to that point where you feel a little bit more opened. The lungs will have more sense of opening, so you can take in a larger breath. And you might even feel that against the floor, the side ribs expanding. And then when you get up, you're in a much better state. And I always liken it to having a really nice sleep or a very short holiday.
So this is very different from going to see a chiropractor or an osteopath, isn't it?
It's very different, because what we're looking at is the underlying cause of our tension patterns in the body, and it's those underlying habits that we're trying to get in touch with, and it's a work. We call it the Alexander work,
yes,
and not a therapy. So it makes it a little different. It's really you come for a lesson, and then you take what you learn in your lesson home and try to apply it in your everyday life, and it's a journey.
So yes, so there's no pushing and pulling.
There's no pushing and pulling. There's lots of thinking going on, and we're sending these directions. So we are really looking to elongate and lengthen and widen, and we're trying to apply those directions as we go about our everyday life.
And so it's great for anybody in any condition, even if you just want a bit of a boost.
Even if you want a bit of a boost, or if you're just really looking to keep things going along, chipping along really nicely. So, we often think of it as a preventative, so that you're not going to get into trouble later. So you begin to perhaps notice that you always carry your handbag on the right-hand side. So you say to yourself, well, no, I'm really pulling down on that right-hand side. Maybe if I share the load, I'm going to even out that over time, and I won't end up with a slight hip displacement on that side. People come with all manner of problems. I've had people who've had arms that haven't been sorted out. They've got pins and needles in their arms, and they've been to neurosurgeons there's nothing physically wrong, but we have a few lessons in the Alexander technique and the feeling came back. I've had people who have been on inhalers for many years, and they've had a few lessons and they can stop using the inhaler, that was really fantastic. I had a runner the other day, and I said to her, just forget about doing your timed run. Just think of the head floating away from the top of the spine, the whole of the back lengthening and widening as you're running. Stay with that, and she ran her circuit in a much faster time. So I was very pleased with that. So it can help anybody, from performers to people who have chronic low back pain. There's been studies now, you can see online many studies that will show that the Alexander technique really does work over time. So it's not, unfortunately, a quick fix, but it can actually get to the root of many problems. This is a poem by Mencius, who lived shortly after Confucius in China. And he's written quite a few lovely things, but I think sums up very clearly actually the Alexander technique. If we can find the point of balance in the body, we can easily settle the details. If we can easily settle the details, we will stop rushing around. If we stop rushing around, our mind will become calm. If our mind becomes calm, we can think in front of a tiger. If we can think in front of a tiger, we will surely succeed.
That's really lovely. Thank you.
You're very welcome.